Hello, it's Matt McLachlan. Before we get to this week's podcast, I wanted to extend a very special invitation to you. In August 2025, my signature tour is heading back to the Western Front, and I'd love you to come with me. We're going to explore the battlefields of France and Belgium and tell the entire story of the Australians during the First World War. It's going to be an amazing trip. We're going to visit the Somme, we're going to visit the Ypres Salient, French Flanders, famous battlefields such as Passchendaele, Pozières, Villers-Bretonneux, Bullecourt, Fromelles, and many more. Now, this is the only tour I'm going to personally escort to the Western Front in 2025. So if you'd like to come with me, please don't wait. The tour sells out very, very quickly. It departs Paris on the 30th of August, 2025, and you can find full information at our website, which is battlefields.com.au.
A Living History production.
I'm Peter Hart.
And I'm Gary Bain.
And together we're Pete and Gary's Military History
Podcast. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Gary Bain, and once more I'm joined by Peter Hart, but for a change we're at his house, Shea Hart.
Shea Hart indeed.
Good morning, Pete. Now,
morning.
Before we start, and I want to make it clear up front, today I'm going to be doing all my own stunts.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, don't try to stop me, and that's why I've got this big red helmet.
At least it's not purple, mate.
Now, I was avoiding saying that. Oh well, editing. Now,
The ball came across and I edited it in.
just as a reminder for everybody,
What are we remembering?
this series of podcasts, if you want to know more, you can get Chain of Fire, Campaigning in Egypt and the Sudan, 1882 to 1898, by your good self, available on all good and some bad outlets, but also from your own sum up.
Yes. And what do we call this book in reality?
Chain of Sausages. Or Sausage Ring. Now, this is the third
Yeah.
in our
Third of lots.
series of podcasts, yeah. And this one is called, and we're going to struggle with this, Advance to Qassasim.
It's an interesting word. It's spelled Qassasin, and we've got no idea how to pronounce it, have we?
No, but we're going for K, as in
Yes.
Qassasim.
Despite the fact it starts with a Q,
Yeah,
as in Qassasin.
we may be wrong.
We may.
Now, what's happening?
I don't know.
Well, Wolseley's diminutive armada
Oh.
swept through the night and appeared at dawn off Port Said to totally surprise the Egyptians. This is following his cunning ruse.
Oh, this is right. So he'd left Hamley's division behind, thinking that they were going to attack Abu Kibir. And in fact, it was a ruse de la guerre.
It was. Now, there was merit in maintaining surprise, for Colonel Ahmed Arabi could have ordered the blocking of the Suez Canal or the defence of Port Said, but the canal was open and Port Said lay naked before them, a bit like you are today.
Yes, indeed. Now Wolsey, thereby, he's achieved his initial objective, and his ships sail up the canal. They take El Kantara on the way and make their base at the town of Ismailia, halfway down the canal. One thing that's interesting for anybody who's studied the British Army through the 20th century, well, all these names occur again and again and again. And why is that, Gary?
Because we keep going back to the same places.
No, because they're on the Suez Canal, which is important to the British.
And we keep going back to the same places.
Oh,
Same thing in Europe.
It
You go through the same place names.
We do keep going to Ypres.
That's true. Now, where they were was the focal point of the railways to Cairo and Port Suez, but also of the Sweetwater Canal, which supplied drinking water taken from the Nile at Cairo.
I bet that was lovely.
Yeah, Wolseley realised that it was essential that he advance as quickly as possible to avoid Arabi's forces draining the canal and destroying the railway.
Now, as a first step, Major General Gerald Graham's 2nd Brigade advance guard move up a couple of miles to the west, heading west from Ismailia and the canal, to seize without opposition, Gary, the key rail junction of, how would you pronounce that, Nifisha?
Yeah, I think that's about right. Behind them, the main force began to disembark in force on the 21st of August. Ismailia was soon crowded with troops, and amongst them, Lieutenant James Grierson. It's like a who's who of great war generals, isn't it?
Now, why do we know Grierson? Do you remember which division he commanded?
Not division, but he was second corps.
Tried to trick you there.
Second corps commander, and he died, I think, of a heart attack.
Yep.
On his way to take up
17th of August.
Position in France on a train, I believe.
And who replaced him? Your favourite?
Smith Dorrien.
Yeah, that's right. And Grierson was a very promising officer, and he'd been posted from India to act as an intelligence officer on Wolsey's staff. And he says this. What does he say, Gary?
Ismailia is very crowded. Troops are bivouacking in every street and square. Horses are picketed all along the canal banks, and the place presents an animated appearance. Personally, I'm as fit as possible, except my skin, which is rapidly peeling off my face and hands. I've mounted a pair of goggles. You never saw anything so curious as the sight of an army wearing blue goggles, and all with blue veils over their faces. I don't like the latter, and shan't wear one. It's fearfully hot, simply grilling by day, but the nights are most deliciously cool and very pleasant.
I like Grierson. Now, speed was of the essence, Gary. So on the 24th of August, 1882. Why do I always get dates? Well, Wolsey moved off in a reconnaissance to further west to determine where exactly the Egyptian forces were. Now, who did he take with him?
Well, he had 3 squadrons of household cavalry and mounted infantry.
Fine bodies of men.
The York and Lancaster Regiment, the Royal Marine Light Infantry, and a couple of Royal Horse Artillery guns. Now, William Butler, who was another intelligence officer, was entranced by the desert conditions as he explored out to the flank. And you're going to tell us what Lieutenant Colonel William Butler of headquarters said.
You have to watch it when you're exploring out to the flanks. He said this: "There's nothing like it in the world. Only sand, the sand of the hourglass, but made infinite by space, just as a tumbler of sea water becomes infinite in the ocean. Sand drifted into motionless waves, heaped in ridges, scooped into valleys, flattened, blown up into curious cones and long yellow banks, the tops of which the winds have cut into fretted patterns as it blew over them. And all so silent, so withered, and yet so fresh, so soft, so beautiful, and yet so terrible." Sounds like an advert for that toilet paper. Think we can get sponsorship from, what is that toilet paper? Andrex. Get your Andrex here, clear up your desert wastes.
I think it's pronounced anthrax.
No, Gary, it's not.
They'd only got forward a couple of miles when they found the canal dammed near El Magfar, and not far beyond, they could see the Egyptians were present in strength at El Mahuta. And Lieutenant Colonel William Butler goes on.
"From where we stood, the desert for 3,000 yards rose gradually to El Mahuta, where some lofty mounds of sand and broken pottery still marked what is supposed to have been the spot at which the Pharaoh decreed that the Israelites should make bricks without straw." I have no idea what that reference is about. I may have missed some parts of religious studies. These mounds ended the forward view. They were now black with figures, while to the right and left of them a long open line of Arab camelmen and horsemen stretched along the skyline far into the desert on either flank. It was a very striking scene. The morning sun shone full in their faces. Musket barrel and spearhead flashed and glittered along the desert ridge, while behind it the heads of many more men and camels showed above the ridge, and beyond them again straight columns of black railway smoke were rising into the still, clean air of the desert, showing that the resources of civilization had also been called into request by the Egyptian enemy, and that his infantry were being hurried up from the direction where lay Tel El Kabir to make head against our further advance. I think that was a completely different accent from the first one, but I can never remember accents.
Oh, it was beautiful in some ways.
Still, I'm looking forward to your Cornish accent, which I believe takes most of this podcast.
Although Wolseley estimated the Egyptians numbered some 10,000 men and 10 guns, he decided it would be invidious to retreat and decided to fight a holding action, having first seized control of the El Magfar Dam in front of the Egyptian positions. And this is Lieutenant General Garnet Wolseley of headquarters. Although I had but 3 squadrons of cavalry, 2 guns and about 1,000 infantry, I felt it would not be in consonance with the traditions of Her Majesty's army that we should retire, even temporarily, before Egyptian troops, no matter what their numbers might be. I decided, therefore, upon holding my ground until evening, by which time I knew that the reinforcements I had sent for to Nifishar and Ismailia would reach me. I consequently took up a position suited to the numbers at my disposal, with my left resting on the captured dam over the canal, and the cavalry and mounted infantry covering the right. It was now 9 o'clock.
So a rider was sent back, calling for the Guards Brigade, fine body of men. The Duke of Cornwall's regiment, we know someone who's with that, don't we, John? Mr. Philip, Sergeant Philip, and the 3rd King's Royal Rifle Corps. Someone at your front door, Gary?
Yes.
And they were to march to the sound of the guns. And slowly those reinforcements began to trickle in. And this, once again, is the boss, Lieutenant General Garnet Wolseley.
From 10 to 11 o'clock, the enemy continued to develop his attack upon my centre and right. His guns were served with considerable skill, the shells bursting well amongst us. Fortunately, they were common shells with percussion fuses, which sank so deep in the very soft sand before bursting that few splinters flew upwards. When he did use shrapnel, the time fuses were badly cut. Feeling complete confidence in my ability to drive back any close attack the enemy might make, I did not allow our guns to open fire for some time after they were placed in position, hoping he might thereby be the more readily induced to advance to close quarters under the notion that we had no artillery with us. When, however, he brought 12 guns into action to relieve the household cavalry into whose ranks and those of the mounted infantry he was throwing his shells with great accuracy, our 2 guns opened upon his 12 guns with marked effect, our practice being very good. The household cavalry and mounted infantry were skillfully manoeuvred by Major General Drury Lowe on the extreme right to check the enemy's advance on that side, but the horses, just landed from a long sea voyage and fatigued by their march across a desert deep in sand, were in no condition to charge. About noon, 2 Gatlings with a party of sailors under command of Lieutenant King Harmon and belonging to HMS Orion arrived and took up a position for action.
Now, I think we meant to say before this, but we've noticed there are some changes in grammar over the century or two since this year. It can be somewhat confusing, I find.
Yeah, I do think Victorian punctuation is sometimes difficult to read.
Now, the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry, they're back at Nifisha when they were called to arms, and they have to march to the sound of the guns, or where they were told anyway. And we're going to have another treat. This is voice acting central for Gary today, and he's going to bring once again Corporal John Phillip of the 2nd Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry to life in your very ears.
Most of us were in the shirt sleeves, squatting on the sand and devouring hard regulation biscuits, waiting for the coffee to call, when the bugles rang out the assembly. That call is answered by a sharp turnout, even in barracks, but with the enemy in the near vicinity, it means simply a maddening charge. Coats, arms, accoutrements, etc. were thrown on in wild confusion, canteens of coffee upset in the melee for first on parade. In a space of time almost incredible to a non-military man, we were dashing from the tents and forming in the ranks, eagerly scanning in the country around for a sight of the foe. But no, we had to go to them. "Fours right, quick march!" came the sharply uttered command, and away we tramped through the soft sand, sinking several inches at every step. We knew from the stern looks of our respected commander and his hurried whispering to the other officers that some new development of the enemy had taken place, which required our immediate attention.
This is definitely your best accent ever. Better even than some of your...
My Australian?
No, that's terrible. Better than some of your... I remember the South Not Cesars thing, which may be the next blast from the past after this series.
I think my London accent's very good.
No, it's terrible. It sounds common and vulgar. Now, it's a forced march. They're in the broiling heat, the sun glaring down on them, unblinking, and it drives them almost to distraction. They begin to suffer agonies of thirst, and some of them actually, you know that old trick? Sucking a pebble to try and get some water, some moisture in their mouth. And at last, at about 1300 that day, they arrived at the scene of the battle, and once again, you're going to relive the scene as Corporal John Phillip.
We made our way across an open plain in rear of our own batteries, and there the sight was sufficient to send the blood leaping through the veins with excitement and admiration. Those brave fellows were stripped to their shirts and trousers sleeves rolled up, The perspiration...
I want to do our trousers up sleeves.
The perspiration streaming from their faces as they loaded and fired like devils let loose. Before a gun had ceased to rebound from the concussion of firing, half a dozen hands were on the wheel, putting it in position again. They were fighting against fearful odds. It was a case of 40 cannon to 10, but there was no flinching. The shells crashed around that little band, but they heeded them not. As my company was passing one of the batteries, I observed a tall artilleryman directing his eye along his gun, apparently taking careful aim. While so doing, his head was literally blown to pieces. But ere his lifeless body had reached the ground, another was in his place, and in a twinkling, an angry report rang from the muzzle as if bidding defiance to the numerous foe.
Now they move forward and get level with Wolseley's positions, and they take up a line of sandbanks. That's what they line up along there. And here John Phillip, he cursed, Gary. Can you imagine it? The insouciant approach and appearance of one of the attached war correspondents who is making himself a target, which nobody cares about. Nobody cares about war correspondents. But in doing so, he's attracted shells which were threatening to plunge amongst the 2nd Duke of Cornwall's light infantry, who did object to that. And once again, here we have John Phillip.
An occasional shell came tearing amongst us, but did no damage till one of those daring fellows, war correspondents, came galloping up on horseback and dismounted on the higher ground in front. Throwing the reins over his arm, he sat down on a camp stool, produced his notebook and set to work. The enemy, no doubt eyeing him through their field glasses and probably thinking he was devising a plan for their annihilation, poured a perfect torrent of shot and shell about his devoted head. But he was made of the real stuff, for he wrote on. Sometimes he was hid from our view in a cloud of sand, raised by a shell falling within a few yards of him. As it cleared away, he was seen to shake the remnants of it from his notebook and continue his task. It eventually got too hot for his charger, for it plunged and reared to such an extent that the brave writer had to remount and seek a more safe retreat. Glad were we when he left, for the shells meant for him came dancing amongst us in a rather unpleasant manner.
That was brilliant, Gary. Brilliant. A great scene. You can almost picture this war correspondent sat up there with his camp stool. Now, Wolseley's makeshift line holds, mainly thanks to the rapid and accurate fire of his artillery. One by one, the reinforcing battalions he'd called forward arrive on the scene. And next morning, in the cold light of dawn, the British infantry advance on the Egyptian positions. And who should we have to tell this story? Should we have someone different, or should we have John Phillip again? Yeah, let's have John Phillip.
A front line of skirmishers moving steadily forward towards a long ridge of gradually sloping sandhills, on the summit of which could be seen the earthworks from where the guns of the enemy had poured such a deadly shower on the preceding day. Every moment we expected them to blaze out again in all their fury, accompanied as they would be by the still more deadly rattle of musketry, for by this time we were within range of that weapon. I can assure you that hearts beat fast with suppressed excitement. when, within about 300 yards, the remark passed freely among the ranks, "Won't we catch it when they do wake up?" But no, all was silent, and a halt was ordered. An officer was seen to gallop to the brow of the hill without molestation, and then we knew the foe had fled. Instantly, there was a commotion among the staff surrounding Lord Wolseley. Mounted officers galloped hither and thither with new instructions to the various corps. Up dashed 2 batteries of Royal Horse Artillery, the 19th Hussars, and about 50 mounted infantry. They swept majestically past us in all the pride of military glory, bent on the tracks of the flying enemy.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, so they got away with that and advanced. The Egyptians, what's happened to them? Well, they've fallen back to a camp established at Tel El Kabir, about 20 miles further to the west, further back along the railway and canal which had come out from Cairo, if you see what I mean. A vigorous pursuit followed, with the cavalry sweeping aside token opposition at El Masuma station. They did catch them on the hop there, didn't they?
Yeah, because they captured 7 Krupp guns, a stores depot, and several loaded railway wagons. The cavalry also discovered an Egyptian dressed in civilian clothes wandering about on the station platform, no less a figure than Ahmed Arabi's chief of staff and chief engineer, Mahmoud Fahmy Pasha.
Ooh. Now, they press on to capture the village of El Qassasim, where they found the canal lock intact. This meant that the British could now control the water along a stretch of the Streetwater Canal all the way back to Ismailia, where they'd come from. At least they could. What did they have to do first?
Well, they've got to remove the dam at El Magfar. Was that a message on your phone, Pete?
What is going wrong with the pair of us today?
Now, this proved easier said than done, as considerable ingenuity had been employed in its construction, with alternative layers of sand and bundles of reeds lashed together with telegraph wire. A mixed working party of sailors, sappers and soldiers strove to pull the dam apart using picks and shovels, but even explosives had minimal effect.
Yeah, it takes a couple of days of really hard graft before the canal was open for navigation up to the Qassasim lock. That, though, now opens it from Qassasim right back to Ismailia. They've got a water supply. One minor task they have to do. What's that minor task?
Well, they've got to remove the bodies of the Egyptians that had been thrown in to pollute it.
Oh, lovely. Now, things are going well, but what's the most important thing in warfare, would you say, Gary?
Logistics,
yes,
as our good friend would say.
Yeah, Rob Thompson, much lamented. And the logistical problems are becoming apparent. To put it in simple terms, something that you're eminently suited to do, Gary.
Yes, mate. Wolseley had outrun his supply chain.
Oh, right.
Now, as a result, a temporary halt was called at El Qassasim, and the recently recaptured railway had been severed in places, and it would all take time to repair.
Yeah, they're also short of mules and camel transport, which they need to carry the stuff. Is that too technical for you?
No, I understood that. Now, the result was the troops had to exist on a meagre diet of biscuits, washed down with a dribble of polluted water.
Sounds lovely, doesn't it?
Foraging broadened the diet with watermelons, while local farms were officially recompensed for sequestered cattle and sheep. Yeah, I wonder if they were.
Well, I bet. Then British normally do pay for as they go, mostly. Actually, they do officially. The problem is the troops.
Yeah.
Now, as the canal was unblocked, the Navy helped. Does the Navy usually help? Yes. And they managed to get some supplies forward with a chain of boats moving up and down along the opened waterway. However, it was still a bloody tough time, wasn't it? Why?
Well, if you think about it, they lacked shelter. They were also suffering from heat exhaustion and sunstroke on top of everything else. Now, the conditions had certainly impacted on the Guards Brigade, who were still at El Magfar. And this is Lieutenant Charles Balfour of the 1st Scots Guards, which were the 1st Brigade.
Working class lad, do you think?
Oh, I think almost definitely.
The typical guardsman would look curious in Pall Mall. Bristly beards, some have grown very well. Hair cropped as if he'd been undergoing 14 days. 14 days punishment, yeah. As brown as a Spaniard. Stained serge frock of an uncertain colour, trousers and boots somewhere underneath a thick coating of dust. The men get very hard work again digging out the block on the canal and railway. While at it they work tremendously hard, as the Royal Engineers all say no ordinary infantry of the line could do the work they do.
No.
I bet they say something.
They could have stayed a bit cleaner if they'd rolled the sleeves up on their trousers. Now, gradually, the essentials begin to arrive, and Lieutenant Charles Balfour goes on.
Tents at last, brought up by boat on the canal, and now not only tents but kit bags and beds turn up. Here's luxury! Instantaneous rush on baths, general cleaning of teeth and brushing of hair. The tents look like a ship, fully dressed. All the clothes we have worn for the last week hung out to air, and a change of clothes adopted. Quite a curious sensation to feel thoroughly clean.
The pause also allowed the British to complete their concentration based at Ismailia rather than Alexandria. More cavalry arrived, plus an Indian contingent. On the 26th of August 1882...
Nice date.
The frustrated and annoyed Lieutenant General Hamley sent a pleading communication towards this Chief of Staff, John Adier. And this is Lieutenant General Edward Hamley of HQ 2nd Division.
He's delightfully bad-tempered. Oh, can you not tell me what you wish me to do? The place will be in a good state of defence this evening. Remember, he's back at Alexander. I could leave... He's coughing with the emotion. I could leave 3.5 battalions to bring you 4. Or if sailors take the police duties, could bring you 5. Shall I take any steps for embarkation? He often changed accent after he'd coughed.
He did. The mood of the fuming subordinate was not ameliorated by a further 2 days' wait before he was ordered to bring the Highland Brigade round to join Wolseley's main force.
Now, on 28th of August 1882... the British reorganised and prepared. They had reorganised. They're preparing for the next stage of the advance. But the Egyptians cheat. How do they cheat?
Well, they launched a couple of spoiling attacks on El Qassasim, which was being held by Major General Gerald Graham with 1,728 infantry, 57 cavalry, 70 mounted infantry and 2 13-pounder guns.
Yeah, so they're going to be really outnumbered.
Well, first, a large force of Egyptian cavalry appeared to the north of Qassasim. Graham immediately sent a heliograph message to Major General Drury Lowe in command of the cavalry brigade back at Marsama.
Well, the cavalry move forward. They're all ready to be called on, but then this attack fails to develop. The Egyptians sort of appear and then withdraw again, and so the Drury Lowe and his cavalry return to Marsuma. Ooh.
The real thrust came later at about 1630, when a considerable body of Egyptian infantry advanced behind a mile-wide line of skirmishers and supported by heavy artillery fire.
Now, Graham realised that this renewed threat was much more serious, and he again sends a message back to Drury Lowe, ordering him to move forward. Meanwhile, guess who's heavily engaged, Gary? Guess who's heavily engaged? And they're on the left of...
Would it be the Cornwalls?
Yeah, they're on the left of Graham's thin red line. The interesting point, they are, of course, most of them dressed in red.
And this is once more Corporal John Phillip. The railway was on our right, made up for a distance of half a mile, forming an embankment from 20 to 30 feet high. It ran parallel to and some 200 yards from the canal on our left. The intervening ground was rough and uneven. We formed deliberately up for the fray, having plenty of time for the enemy, though in sight were a good way off. As they came nearer and within rifle range, the smoke curled above their lines, followed by the whoosh of the bullets and the heavy roar of shells, announcing their challenge. Coolly, we took up our position under a galling fire, one half lining the railway embankment, while the other half extended to a thin line, each file 2 paces apart, at right angles and in the open plain, directly in front of the advancing host.
Now, they soon come under a heavy fire, and I can't believe how much work you do. Are you all right?
I have to do everything.
You do. And again, you're John Phillip.
Bullets whistled close to our ears, their sharp Ping! Only to be heard when they come within a few feet, as the continuous crash of exploding shells filled the air. We waited till the front line of the opposing infantry was within 900 yards, and then opened fire with a vengeance. But the thinning process was going on. Man after man, struck by the leaden hail, rolled down the embankment, clutching vainly at the sand in their descent.
What a picture. Now, Philip himself has a really lucky escape. Yeah, you might indeed call it fortuitous.
I received a stunning blow on the right side of the head, which sent the brain reeling, and the man rolling down the embankment. I lay for a few minutes in a semi-unconscious state, and then sat up and looked around on the ghastly sight at the bottom of the ravine, which ran along below the railway side. My helmet lay beside me, the chain which had been hooked up cut in two, the thick puggery, for the benefit of the listeners, the band around the pith helmet, round it to protect the head from the hot sun, torn on one side to tatters, and part of the helmet itself away I knew not where. It was a near shave, and to the chain I believed I owed my life. It had turned the missile, and the thick folds of the puggery had deadened the blow. I put my hand gradually up, and it was with a feeling of indescribable relief that my fingers, instead of going into the hole I imagined, passed over a ponderous lump. I breathed more freely, and sticking on my battered helmet, scrambled up to renew the fight, feeling little or none the worse of my expected transference to another world.
I did notice a couple of words there that are peculiar apposite to you in whatever guise you are. The words ponderous lump.
Do you know, I knew you were going to say that. I'm almost psychic. Now, the Cornwalls held their line, but to the right, the Egyptians were threatening to fall on Graham's exposed right flank.
Now, 1720 that day, Graham sent his ADC, Lieutenant Duncan Pirrie, to tell Drury Lowe, that's the cavalry commander, to take the cavalry in a wide sweep round to allow them to strike in turn at the exposed left flank of the Egyptians. So while the Egyptians are attacking his right flank, he'd attack their left flank, if you see what I mean. Now, Pirrie had a lot of problems. He was at first unable to find Drury Lowe. Why might that have been?
Well, it was getting dark, I think.
That'd be it. Can you imagine how tense it was? He'd be getting really worried, and then his horse gets all tidy. And he was really lucky he was able to borrow a replacement from an a passing artillery battery. At last he encounters Drury Lowe, and he was some 4 miles to the northwest of Qassasim. Now, what happens next? Why is this interesting to me?
Well, because what did happen triggered an interesting spat between generals, as he blurted out not only that the cavalry must attack the Egyptian left as soon as possible, but added the disturbing comment that Graham was only just able to hold his own.
Now, this is a pathetic incident, but when that appeared in Drury Lowe's official post-battle report, it triggered absolute outrage from Graham, General Graham, who in fairness had said no such thing, and from Wolsey, who felt that his subaltern was criticising the security of his deployments, and it became a cause célèbre. That's French, Gary.
In the British newspapers. That's British, Pete.
Yeah, it is. And it went on for months. And you've got the various press journalists and the various generals and officers, anonymous, of course, chiming in on either to back up Pirrie's interpretation of the situation or to back up Wolsey and Graham.
Now, be that as it may, on the night of the 28th of August, one can be pretty certain that Corporal John Phillip would have sided with Pirrie. And this is, once more, me being John Phillip. It was fairly dark now, and nothing of the enemy could be seen, but the flashes of their rifles and cannons, and we fired in reply at random. Our ammunition being almost done, the firing waxed feeble, and unless we got relief, our stubborn stand would be of no avail. As soon as our fire died away, it would only be a matter of a few minutes for the superior numbers of the Egyptians to advance and crush us, for we were only a handful of worn-out men.
Now, that's definitely going with what Pirrie blurted out. As far as, he doesn't know the real situation, Philip, but that's what it was to him. Now, then, not a moment too soon. The
cavalry arrives, and amongst them, was Major Reginald Talbot, and he recalls the excitement of what followed.
We marched along the line of sand ridges, an occasional order to trot along, breaking the silence. We must have marched 5 or 6 miles when it was broken by the boom of a gun, followed by the hissing of a shell. General Lowe shortly ordered our guns to unlimber and reply, and the 7th Dragoon Guards to clear the front of our guns, which they did by retiring, making us the front line. So the Dragoon Guards get out. The Dragoon Guards get out of the way, he means. The household cavalry continued to advance at a walk when, in a moment, became visible a white line of infantry in our immediate front, which opened a tremendous fire upon us. Not a moment was to be lost. Form front in 2 lines, draw swords, charge! And we were upon them. Until we got within 100 yards, they continued to fire. But in one moment, the brilliant light from the firing line, the rattle of the fire and whirring of the bullets ceased. The white line had faced about and was in flight. We rode them down in solid rank, but as they dispersed, we opened out and pursued. They fell like ninepins, many of them unwounded, who fired and stabbed at our horses as we galloped past them. We charged for 300 yards. Then Ewart, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Ewart, was commander of the, you'd like to know this, Gary, of the Household Cavalry Composite Regiment. That's who Ewart is. Ewart called out, "Rally!" and we set to work to collect our man. I can imagine no more splendid sight than this moonlight charge of our fine fellows on their dark horses against the guns supported by the whole line of Egyptian infantry, whose fire was so brilliant in the night that it looked just like the beginning of some grand pyrotechnic display. Then the cheer we gave, then the few seconds of silence, and then the havoc and the slaughter.
Their decisive intervention was much appreciated by...
Oh, can I guess this one?
Yes.
Is it John Phillip?
It is, and Corporal John Phillip of the 2nd Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry says this: "As if by magic, the noise of artillery and musketry ceased, and in its place came a tremendous British cheer. It was our cavalry charging through the Egyptian host. Thank God, we were saved. We could only see a black mass flying swiftly along, but the thunder of their horses' feet and their ringing cheers, mingling with the clash of sabres and the cries of terror and dismay from the enemy, told how terrible was the force of that brilliant charge. The battle was over, and the foe beaten and flying, pursued by our gallant horsemen, who captured the whole of their cannons, cutting the gunners down at their posts. So suddenly did they dash amongst them."
Now, even so, there's a tragic aftermath of any battle. It doesn't matter how successful you are, there's going to be sad incidents. For the survivors are exhausted. And I want you to picture this scene. The 2nd Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry, they've had a bad time, and they return to their camp at Qassasim. And Corporal John Phillip has, again, a wonderful Cornish perspective. It probably came from London, but it's, you know.
"The company's rolls were called, and with solemn looks we heard many a well-known name shouted by the orderly sergeants without the answering 'Here!' There would have been a larger dead and wounded roll had we been a stronger party. The thinness of our lines and the cover of the railway saved a good deal of life. As it was, the killed and wounded amounted to about 100. I and some more went down to the side of the bridge where lay the wounded. The doctors were busy amongst them, and groans and cries of pain resounded on all sides. Some were in the throes of death, others bright and cheery, with legs or arms disabled. We did not stay long, simply bidding our best-known comrades goodbye, and then retraced our way to the camp."
And the other people, I mean, even in that really successful cavalry charge, there's some people are dreadfully wounded. And this is on the night of the 30th of August, which is a bit later, Major Alexander Tulloch.
He's now back on land.
He's not a sailor anymore. Then he's back on land, and he's been attached to Wolsey as an intelligence officer.
That's a surprise.
Yeah, and he was carrying the first of several reconnaissances of the ground between Qassasim and Tel El Kabir, when he passed over the scene of the moonlight charge. And this is what Tulloch says. There were many dead, and to my horror I found several wounded men, some in a state of delirium, others very weak but still sensible. I shall never forget the eager, almost wolf-like clutch at my orderly's water bag as soon as the unfortunate man he was assisting knew what it was. I sent in at once for doolies. Doolies, Gary?
That's stretcher bearers.
Thanks, mate. From the Indian cavalry. And one poor fellow I helped to carry had his abdomen sliced open by a sword cut. Fortunately, the bowels had not been touched, but I had to put them back in their place before I moved the man. God. Another was a wounded officer. A huge fellow. As I lifted him, his head, badly cut and festering, fell on my shoulder. The broken bone of his left arm was protruding through the cloth of his coat. This I did not notice until placing him flat in his dually stretcher. All this time, the enemy's cavalry pickets were watching me at some few hundred yards distance, but seeing what I was doing, they did not advance. 4 or 5 of the wounded I brought in recovered, amongst them the tall officer, which is amazing. I mean, that's a bad time. Yeah.
The recces showed that the Egyptian Tel El Kebir defences were gaining in numbers and that some units had been transferred in from Kafr Dawa.
Now that's the defences that had faced Alexandria.
But the British too were gaining in strength. Wolseley's whole army was moving up in stages with the aim of concentrating at Qassasim by the 12th of September.
Oh, right. Now the Indian Brigade, we mentioned Indian contingent, and the Highland Brigade were amongst those that were arriving. Highland Brigade under the command of our favourite Hamley. And soon the whole corps would be ready to make the final drive on Tel El Kebir.
The railway.
Oh, well, we're both on the railway. We're both going on the railway, are we?
Yeah, and it was at last back in working order, which alleviated the supply problem. So things are getting better all round.
All round. Oh, no, not for the Egyptians.
Well, hopes.
On 9th of September, Colonel Ahmed Arabi made another attempt to disrupt the British build-up when he launched another attack on Qassasim. He'd been informed by his Bedouin irregular forces that they'd severed the communication links between Ismailia and Qassasim, which they also claimed was weakly held. This is bollocks.
Technical term?
Yeah, bad intelligence. It's a two-pronged assault. One Egyptian force marching east from Tel El Kebir, straight along, and the other marching south from Es Celia. I wish I'd left that to you. Now,
by this time,
oh yes,
the British were ready, and they were having amassed a force of nearly 8,000, commanded by Lieutenant General George Willis at Qassasim, who also had plentiful reserves close at hand. So the Second Battle of Qassasim begins when outpost pickets of the 13th Bengal Lancers, very famous, detected their approach. Gerald Graham, that's General Gerald Graham, certainly relished the challenge as he swung his brigade into action when the alarm was raised back at Qassasim at 06:45. And you're going to tell us what Major General Gerald Graham of HQ 2nd Brigade says.
The Philistines are upon us. Are they mad? In 5 minutes my dispositions are made, and in 20 minutes the troops are out in line of battle. Heavy artillery from enemy as before, but our guns advance for the infantry, and before 9 a.m. the enemy are in full retreat. So it's a damp squib of a battle, this.
It was, certainly for the Egyptians. Disheartened by the strength and vigour of the British response, they showed little inclination to attack. As the British advanced, the Egyptians began to fall back, and the pursuit was continued until Wolseley brought it to a halt. Afterwards, the intelligence officers interrogated the Egyptian wounded and prisoners and received confirmation of the friable state of morale in Arabi's camp.
Now, this is Captain Charles Watson, one of the intelligence officers just mentioned. He said this: "We received from them confirmation of the accounts of discontent existing in the camp at Tel El Kebir." Everyone says it that way except you. "And of the desire of many to give up fighting and return to their ordinary occupations. One man told me that his officer had recommended it to him to lie down and pretend that he was killed, and then the English soldiers will take you prisoner and will not hurt you." Surely a very pleasant testimony to the native confidence in the humanity of our troops. Yeah, have a listen to the next podcast, by the way. See how that works for them. I asked him whether he was more afraid of the bullets or the shells, and he replied that he was in such a fright that he could not tell the one from the other. God only knows what a fright I was in. I like the sound of that bloke.
However, they also learnt something that would prove of value in the aftermath of the Battle of Tel el-Kebir. And this is once more Captain Charles Watson.
We also learned that there was considerable probability that unless the British advanced rapidly, the city of Cairo would be burned. Not by Arabi and his soldiers, but by what they called the bad people. Persons of similar character to those who destroyed Alexandria after the British bombardment. It was a recollection of this danger to the city that determined the rapid ride to Cairo of our cavalry after Tel el-Kebir.
Wolseley was well aware of the threat to Cairo and determined to smash the power of Ahmed Arabi and his nationalist force once and for all. And this is Major General Gerald Graham, so not Wolseley, but Major General Gerald Graham of headquarters and his view.
No, it's Wolseley's
It's Wolseley's view, but
from
he's going...
him.
Yes.
Don't confuse the lovely listeners, Gary. Wolseley tells me that he doesn't mean to let Arabi escape him next time, that he means to smash him altogether and relies on me to do it. He doesn't mean him to escape into the Delta where he can't get at him.
You did that brilliantly. I might have put you off, though.
Oh, what a put in part. Now, what about the Battle of Tel el-Kebir?
What? Tel el-Kebir?
It would be soon.
Now, this is a bit sort of ripping yarn-like, isn't it, these podcasts?
I can't believe how excited I am during them.
And it's going to get more and more exciting, Peter, so you're going to have to control yourself. However, if you do want to know more, as mentioned at the start of the podcast, Chain of Fire, campaigning in Egypt and the Sudan, 1882 to 1898, is available now.
Published by Profile Books, and I love them.
Very good publishers.
Cheers, Gary.
Cheers, Pete.
Thanks for listening to the show.
Blah, blah, blah.
If you'd like to support us,
blah,
you can now buy us a coffee.
blah,
Visit www.buymeacoffee.com/PGMH.
or visit www.blah.
And we'd be jolly grateful.
Cheers.
Are you a homeowner looking to sell your home fast and want your cash now? How about getting cash for your home twice? Hi, I'm Sarah Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Empower Home Team with Keller Williams. Our cash offer stands above the rest. With our cash offer, you get the majority of your funds based on your home's value right away. That's right, cash in the bank within days. We will then sell your home for top dollar and you get the rest. Yes, with our cash offer, you get paid not only once, but twice. Call us now at 703-637-SOLD or go to debbiehasthebuyers.com.
If you're planning a trip to Europe in 2025, you can walk in the footsteps of the Anzacs. Our Western Front Explorer Tour spends 4 days exploring all the Australian battlefields from the First World War in the Somme, the Ypres Salient and Flanders. This is the only Australian tour that begins and ends in Paris, so it's a really great way to see those famous battlefields. Now, the Western Front Explorer Tour departs weekly between April and November, and it includes accommodation in the heart of the battlefields, deluxe transportation, and a range of extras that you only get on a Matt McLachlan tour. And like all our tours, you'll be escorted by one of our expert historians who will bring the story of the Anzacs to life. This itinerary has been personally designed by me, and all the historians are my friends and colleagues, and I've handpicked them to lead these tours. This really is a brilliant way to see the battlefields. It's the 4-day Explorer Tour, departing weekly from Paris, and for more information you can visit battlefields.com.au.